Hi, Project Lead the Way friends. Today I want to do a little bit of a lesson on insulin and glucose and how this works. So this is a process that you will see a lot throughout the PLTW curriculum. I know that we do it like in PBS, we do it again next year in HBS, and then we hit a little bit again the third year in MI. And then it's something that we talk about in AP Biology if you end up taking that with me. So it's a process that you see a lot in science. And so if you get it now and you understand it now, you've set yourself up to be good to go on the rest of those courses. So let's go ahead and jump in. So insulin is a hormone that is a protein, and it helps glucose be brought into the cell, okay? And so when glucose, anything that ends in ose is a sugar. So like sucrose is table sugar. Glucose is a bigger sugar molecule. Yesterday you learned about 4 macromolecules to kind of get on a tangent here. These are really important. Macromolecules, or I think Project Lead the Way refers to them as biomolecules. These are another huge concept that we spend a lot of time on in biology, whether you're in AP Biology or I know Miss McLean also does them in general biology. You learn a lot about macromolecules. So there's 4 major macromolecules or biomolecules. Hopefully you remember them from yesterday. But one is a protein, okay? One is a carbohydrate. One is a lipid, and we're going to talk about several of these today in this process. And then the last is nucleic acids. So we've talked a little bit about nucleic acids already. We talked about DNA and RNA when we did the anacase. Specifically with DNA, we did a gel electrophoresis and looked at the DNA, and we matched whose DNA it matched to. And so remember that stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So these have 3 parts. They're made up of nucleotides, but the 3 parts of a nucleotide are a 5-carbon sugar, a phosphate group. I should write that out. Phosphate group. In chemistry and AP Biology, they know the abbreviation, but you all probably don't yet. So that's okay. Phosphate group. And nitrogen base. And remember, those nitrogen bases are A, T, G, and C. Okay? So that's really important too. That's our genetic material. Okay? All of these 3 components together are referred to as a nucleotide. And there's a place for you to take some notes. I don't remember what page it's on in your binder, but I would highly recommend taking some notes. And honestly, you may run out of space there, so you may wish to just pull out another sheet of paper to take some notes on. Okay? Lipids. Lipids are a great energy source. They have the most energy, but they're actually like the number 2 energy source. Usually your body will first use carbohydrates as your number 1 source of energy, although they have a little bit less energy than lipids do. But they are made up of lots of carbons and hydrogens, okay? And so lipids are sometimes known as fats. When you think of foods that have a lot of fat in them, or think of things that are like oils, those are lipids. But another thing that lipids are really important for is they are found in the cell membrane. The cell membrane is made up of what's called a phospholipid. There's that phospho word again because it's got a phosphate group. Phospholipid bilayer. Bilayer means it's 2 layers. So let me show you a picture of that real quick, and we're going to come back to this picture. So right here we have our phospholipid. That's one individual phospholipid. But notice we have 2 layers of it. So this is called a phospholipid bilayer that we see here in our cell. This is the phospholipid bilayer. So what you need to know about the lipid, the head, it's called a hydrophilic head. And I may have talked about this some previously. I don't really remember. Hydrophilic head. I teach some things over and over in different classes. And then this part is the hydrophobic tail. Okay? And so the hydrophilic head, that philic means loving. Philadelphia is called the city of love. And so philic means loving. Hydro is implying water. Hydrophobic is like fear of. And so it is water fearing or water hating. So you'll notice that the phobic tail is kind of crouched in here in the middle where it's not going to encounter like the water like in the aqueous environment of the cell. Okay. And so the hydrophobic tail is on the inside. The hydrophilic head is on the outside of this phospholipid bilayer, which is the cell membrane. Okay. So let's go back to my notes here. I added that, but it wouldn't let me draw on it. Okay. So, and then carbohydrates, they have a lot of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in them. Usually there is twice as much hydrogen as there are carbon and oxygen. For example, glucose, as we're going to talk about later, is C6H12O6. And so you see there's twice as many hydrogens as there are oxygen and carbons in glucose. All right. And so that's a carbohydrate, also good for energy. And then last is proteins. Now you probably recognize the term protein. It's in a lot of meats. Proteins are really good for structure, but they also do a lot of transport in the cell. They are kind of our worker guys. They wear the most hats in the cell. And so today we are going to talk about them as transporters. We're going to talk about them as structures. And then we're also going to somewhat talk about them as receptors. And then some proteins are hormones. But we're not going to get in too much. Well, I guess we will get into the hormones a little bit of it. So insulin is a protein that is a hormone that's made by the endocrine system. Let's get going back to our body systems a little bit here. All right, so these are our macromolecules that we're going to discuss today. All right, so let's go over to this image where I can talk about this image and draw on this image a little bit. So we have insulin. So when you have an increase of sugar in your body, when you eat a candy bar, let's say, that candy bar contains sugar, which is broken down, sugar is glucose. It's broken down into glucose. Basically, everything that you eat, if it's not like meat or cheese, has glucose in it. Vegetables, fruit, even if it's a natural form of sugar, it's still got glucose in it. Bread, carbs, all of those are going to have glucose in them. And so when your body detects glucose, it produces insulin. All right? And so the insulin binds to an insulin receptor. And that insulin receptor causes, there's a pathway that happens here that causes these GLUT4 containing vesicles. So what GLUT4 is it's a glucose transporter. Okay? And so these GLUT4 transporters are brought to the cell membrane and embedded here in the cell membrane. Here's our GLUT4 transporter being embedded in the cell membrane. Okay? So when you have sugar, insulin is produced. Insulin causes the glucose transporter to be brought to the cell membrane and embedded in the cell membrane. And then the glucose here, these red molecules, are allowed to move into the cell. Okay? This here is a protein. So there's one of our proteins that we were just talking about. Insulin is a hormone. So that's another type of protein. This is a receptor, which is another type of protein. We said that proteins can do lots of things. They can be structural, they can be used for transport, they could be receptors, and they can be hormones. And we've seen all of that in our diagram. We see the receptors. Let me go back to my other picture. We see our receptors here. Okay, this is a transport protein here. They are a hormone here. All right, this is our insulin hormone, and these diagrams are very simplistic, but you get the idea. And they and they are used to transport glucose. Okay, and so that's what happens. Now, glucose, once we get into the cell, it reduces your blood glucose levels. So if you know anybody that's diabetic, they are frequently checking their blood sugar. Right? After they eat, they check their blood sugar. They'll wait for a little bit after lunch or after a meal or a snack or whatever, and they'll check their blood sugar. They want to see how much sugar they had in their meal and how much it affected their blood sugar, how much sugar is in their blood. And then they'll give themselves a dose of insulin, and that insulin will help to drop the blood sugar, okay? Because this part out here is the blood. And so this is your blood sugar. This is what it's detecting when they use their little glucose meter, okay? They're detecting their blood sugar. And if it's too high, then they'll give themselves insulin, and that will bring these transporters to the surface to allow the sugar to move in. And so it'll mark these out, and it will lower the blood sugar. Okay? Now, if their blood sugar is too low, a different process happens. If the blood sugar is too low, let me see if I can get down here where I can draw some more. If the blood sugar is too low, there is a different hormone that's released. And it's called, or not hormone, sugar, called glucagon. Okay? So your body stores excess glucose as glucagon. So glucagon is a storage sugar. All right? And so kind of think of it as, I'm not a very good hexagon drawer. That is not a hexagon, sorry. Hexagon. Okay, remember glucose is a 6-carbon sugar, right? C6H12O6. So here's some glucose. There's glucose, glucose, glucose. And so you string a bunch of glucoses together and you get glucagon. That's what happens here. And so this whole thing is a glucagon, a bunch of sugars, a bunch of glucoses strung together. And it's used to store sugar. And so if your blood sugar is too low, there's a different pathway that's triggered. And so glucagon, which is stored in the liver, will be released, and it will break down into glucose. And that glucose will be put back in the blood to help raise the blood sugar. Okay? And so later this week, you're going to talk about a feedback loop. Now, Project Lead the Way, you will draw a lot of feedback loops in Project Lead the Way. They like them to be a figure 8, okay? And that's really how they should be. So in the middle of your figure 8, you have normal, okay? Now I'm going to do a feedback loop for temperature, body temperature, because I want you to really focus on your feedback loop for insulin and glucose and blood sugar, okay? So we're going to talk about normal body temperature here, okay? Now sometimes your body temperature will get high, And sometimes your body temperature will drop low, okay? So when you get cold and your body temperature drops, what happens? Well, your body starts shivering, right? You get cold and you kind of get the shivers. Well, what that does is that's a lot of muscle contractions. And those muscle contractions generate energy. And as that energy is released, it's released as heat. And it helps to warm your body up. Okay? And so that helps restore you back to normal temperature. On the opposite, if your body temperature gets too high, instead of start shivering, your body starts sweating, okay? That helps reduce your temperature, which brings you back to normal temperature, okay? This is an example of a negative feedback loop, okay? And it's called a negative feedback because it reduces the stimulus. Most of the feedback loops that we do, including the blood glucose and insulin one, are negative loops because they reduce the stimulus. So the stimulus here is your body temperature is low. And so we are trying to get it back to normal. We are trying to reduce the stimulus. This is the stimulus. This is the stimulus. What causes the process is the stimulus. Okay? And so we are trying to return to normal. Anytime you're trying to get back to normal, it's going to be a negative feedback loop because it's reducing the stimulus. Okay? Now, sometimes in biological systems, there are positive feedbacks. And we'll talk about those more. We'll talk about those in AP Biology. But most of what we're going to do in Project Lead the Way will be negative feedback loops because they reduce the stimulus. All right? And so you can do one for insulin too, okay? You have a normal blood sugar, and I'm going to expect you to expand on this, and I'm going to draw a really rough one, but you're going to have to do one in your notes. But when your blood sugar is high, you have one event, okay? When your blood sugar is low, you have another event, okay? One of them is going to involve glucagon. One of them is going to involve insulin, all right? Both of them should have the liver in them, okay? You'll also need to talk about like transporters. You're going to kind of have to walk through this diagram as I did a moment ago, okay? And so the terms that you really need to know are insulin, glucose, glucose transporters, which are these purple guys are the glucose transporters, okay? You need to know the term glucagon. That's how that's how glucose is stored as. So once the glucose comes into the cell, it will be stored as glucagon. Okay? And all of those are important to help in insulin uptake. So hopefully this lesson helped. You have some animations you're going to go through in Project Lead the Way. You have some things you're going to read about this that will hopefully help solidify it. But I think sometimes me walking through the diagrams and just giving a little person explanation will help that as well. And honestly, this will probably be one that I give you a little bit of feedback on your feedback loops, feedback on your feedback, so that you can correct them and make them better, because I want these loops to be really good, because you have to understand this concept. This will be a concept that on our test will be heavily tested, okay? And that's going to be a while out. We won't test until after Christmas break on this unit. Now at the end of next week, I will say that there's going to be a project, and that is going to be a test grade for this unit, but we won't actually have a paper, pencil, multiple choice type test until after Christmas. Okay, so if y'all have any questions about this, let me know. And if not, then I will see you later. Talk to you soon. Have a great day.